Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the content patch for the 11th of December 2012. My name is TotalBiscuit with around 20 minutes of gaming news and comment. Coming up in the show, Valve working on Dota 2 for tablet devices, Dark Souls 2 to be more understandable. New GameSpy owners shut down servers for new games, and a double whammy of BioShock news with PC information revealed, and its new box art supposedly aimed at, quote, frat guys. At the VGAs on Friday, Gabe Newell said many things, including a rather interesting comment about Dota 2. So it would appear that they're attempting to get Dota 2 running on some tablet devices. He's quoted as saying it ended up being something of a disappointment, but the good news is that tablets are getting faster very quickly, so I think we'll get the kind of performance we want and other game developers want in the future. So what this doesn't mean, folks, is that, oh god, Dota 2 is coming out next week for tablets. No, it isn't. They're just testing it, and it's rather interesting to see Valve make a little bit of movement towards tablet devices, considering that none of their games would actually work very well on any of them. Well, I tell a lie to some degree. There is, of course, one that it would work pretty well on, and that is Project Fiona, the Razer device with the two controllers on either side. It would probably work okay on that, assuming the thing ever comes out, but think about their games library for a second. Think about what they've done. Half-Life, first-person shooter, doesn't tend to work all that well with touchscreens. Team Fortress 2, multiplayer-focused first-person shooter. Nope, that doesn't work well with touchscreens either. Portal, also a first-person shooter, doesn't work all that well with touchscreens at all. Left 4 Dead, cooperative first-person shooter. You see where I'm going with this? Valve just releases FPS, unless you count Codename Gordon, which I don't. That is what they do. They do FPS. And they do FPS in a wide variety of different ways. Dota 2 is their first game that actually ranges away from that, and of course it is just a carbon copy of Dota. The thing is that while Dota might be the most tablet-friendly game, it's still not tablet-friendly at all. I mean, if you want to play this game to any reasonable level of skill, you have to have a lot of accuracy. Getting last hits and getting denies requires a fairly accurate mouse. It does not require you to shove your finger at something on a screen and cover up part of the screen. That in itself is absolutely ludicrous. There's also the notion that, generally speaking, when you design a game for a portable device, you don't want to do it so that you've got to be holding this thing up for 40 to 50 minutes and also have an internet connection for that entire time that is reliable. So, Dota 2 seems like a really bad fit. There are MOBA games that are coming out for mobile devices, and most of them are designed around smaller teams and more forgiving mechanics, as well as the idea that the game will not last 50 minutes, it's more like 10 to 15. So it would actually make more sense for something like Blizzard All-Stars to end up on a tablet, because it's a more casual game, it's easier, and the game itself is supposed to end in about 15 minutes rather than 50. One way or the other, though, MOBA games in their current PC-based form are definitely not suitable for tablets. It's interesting that Valve would try and dabble in that, and eventually, no doubt, they will bring out something for a mobile device, but I wouldn't get too hyped up about this at this point. I very much doubt they're actually going to bring Dota 2 or any of their existing games to tablet, and it's just an experiment for the possibility of future releases. Dark Souls 2 was announced at the Spike Video Game Awards and was perhaps the biggest surprise for that particular event. Since then, there has been very little information released, as you might imagine, considering that was only 2 days ago, but there was a short interview with the game's directors, and the quote that is concerning an awful lot of people is, "I personally am the sort of person who likes to be more direct than subtle. Dark Souls 2 will be more straightforward and more understandable." Now, the article in question was quick to point out that doesn't mean that the game will necessarily be easier, but the two directors are focused on making the game a little bit more approachable, so that people aren't put off in the first couple of hours. This, to me, is very concerning indeed. Now, you might say, oh, well, why are you worried? Being more approachable is fine. Having more tutorial stuff, that's totally fine. That's absolutely reasonable. No, I don't honestly think that it is, especially if it extends to the notion that more about the world will be told to you directly rather than simply discovered and investigated by you. The really cool thing about Dark Souls, more so even than Demon Souls, is the fact that the game tells you a story through its environment and the characters, and yet those characters barely speak to you. and you have to essentially figure it out yourself. The Dark Souls universe is very complex. It's actually a bunch of jumbled time zones. It's spread across over 1,000 years of history, and you don't really know necessarily which part of the timeline that you're in at any given time. And that is kind of cool. It adds to the mystique of the world. It also adds just how grim and mysterious and, quite frankly, intimidating the world is. And this overall sense of malice that the world has towards you, even though it's a very beautiful world in many places, the eerie sense of not knowing what's going on is part of the atmosphere. The atmosphere contributes directly to it. When you look at a game like Dark Souls, you don't just look at it and saying, oh, this is the RPG version of I Want to Be the Guy. No, it isn't. I Want to Be the Guy doesn't have any sense of atmosphere. It's just dumb. It's a stupid game. Whereas Dark Souls, on the other hand, combines all these different elements together to make this game, which is quite frankly a monolith of intimidation and doom. You feel like you're in a doomed world, and everything from the very start of the game sets you up to believe that. It's like, these are the end times. The fire is burning out. Darkness is coming. There doesn't seem to be any way of stopping it. You yourself are cursed. You have no hope of redemption, yet you must go on this quest anyway, against things which are going to kill you in one hit. Honestly, these things are much bigger than you, they're much scarier than you don't understand them, you don't know why you're having to fight them, but you must fight them anyway because you have no option and you will die over and over and over again. The feeling of hopelessness combined with these very difficult game mechanics gives you this unique experience. And if you take part of that away, then the whole thing can collapse in on itself. I would like to refer to, if you don't mind, a fellow by the name of Epic Name Bro. This is one of my favorite channels on YouTube because I love to watch stuff about Dark Souls, and this guy does Demon Souls and Dark Souls, and that's pretty much all he does. And he focuses a lot on the lore, he does a lot of different challenges and all sorts of different things. You know, he'll dip into a couple of different games like Final Fantasy Tactics and Binding of Isaac, but for the most part, he does Dark Souls and Demon Souls. And he did a very, very good piece on the subject of Dark Souls difficulty, and the idea that if you made the game easier, then you would actually completely destroy what made it unique in the first place. It's not even about being accessible. Having an easier difficulty mode essentially wrecks the game and means that the game isn't actually that fun at all. So I don't like the idea. Like, the very notion of it doesn't really fill me with a whole lot of confidence. Dark Souls is already a good series. It has managed to reach a point of prominence and sold a good number of copies. What I will say, good news, is that it's actually going to be coming out on PC. It's been announced as a PC release, hopefully, at the same time as the consoles, and we can also hope that the port will be good. So I guess that there has been some success with the PC port, even if it wasn't particularly good until it was modded and fixed by fans. So unpleasant news coming out for those of you who happen to like certain classic PC multiplayer titles. The new owners of the GameSpy server middleware system, which is of course what is used for server matchmaking and multiplayer in a wide variety of titles, have begun to shut down various servers for titles like the original Sniper Elite, Star Wars Battlefront, Lord of the Rings, War of the Rings, SWAT 4, Wings of War, Battle Stations Midway, and Microsoft Flight Simulator X, which is not actually all that old a game at all. Now, as bad as this is, some of the controversy appears to rise from the fact that this was done unilaterally against the wishes of some of the developers in question. There's a statement here from producer Steve Hart from Rebellion, those are the guys that made Sniper Elite, and said, "A few weeks ago, the online multiplayer servers for Sniper Elite were suddenly switched off by Glue, the third-party service we had been paying to maintain them. For the past 7 years, we've run these servers at cost to ourselves so that fans of Sniper Elite could continue to play online for free. This decision by Glue was not taken in consultation with us and was beyond our control. We have been talking to them since to try and get the servers turned back on. We have been informed that in order to do so, it would cost us tens of thousands of pounds a year, far in excess of how much we were previously paying. We also do not have the option to take the multiplayer to a different provider. Because the game relies on Glue and GameSpy's middleware, the entire multiplayer aspect of the game would have to be redeveloped by us again at a cost of many tens of thousands of pounds. While we are not happy about the situation, as an independent developer, we simply do not have the resources to pay the massive costs of new servers, along with redeveloping a 7-year-old game." Now, the conflict in information seems to come from the fact that when asked by users on Facebook as to why support for Sniper Elite was dropped, GameSpy replied with the following: "Neither Namco nor Rebellion wanted to continue support for the game. I checked with them on why they don't." Now, you might think this is a conflict, saying, oh, well, this isn't what these guys said. Well, no, if you read that in a certain way, it's actually not a conflict at all. Neither Namco or Rebellion wanted to continue support for the game. Those don't contradict each other, because if you follow it up by saying, oh, well, they didn't want to pay the tens of thousands of pounds that Glue are suddenly charging for no apparent reason for these game servers, then yes, you're right, they didn't want to continue support for the game on that basis. But at the end of the day, they were already paying for servers and then suddenly had those servers shut down, and then the server provider said, oh, well, it'll actually cost you way, way more than this in order to keep these running. This is bizarre. It's thoroughly, thoroughly bizarre. It seems like a serious cash grab by Glue, as far as I can tell, and certainly is not something I would consider all that reasonable. And it unfortunately also points out how silly it is to go with this kind of GameSpy middleware stuff, because it's binding servers to a specific provider, which means that once those providers decide, you know what, I don't want to run this anymore, you're boned. You are straight up boned. Whereas it makes much more sense to have the ability to simply host servers in multiple places and actually release the server code for anyone to host a server. Now, lately, we've seen a lot of games that have not provided that. And indeed, many games have gone down the route of saying, well, you can have a dedicated server, but only with our specific provider, which means that once they drop support for the game, you are done when it comes to multiplayer. This is greatly disturbing. It's already happening on console. EA did an awful lot of it for older sports titles. They shut down a lot of different servers, and even older racing games, which actually still had a population. And the fact that we're seeing this on PC as well is really abhorrent to me, because it's against what the platform really stands for. The idea of being able to provide your own solution, the idea of being open and actually having options and choices and genuine competition within the space. And it worries me greatly that we're seeing things going in that direction, but even that older games actually end up being stuck to that as a result of stuff like the GameSpy system. It really is worrying, honestly, and quite frankly, it may put me off buying titles in future that actually use any kind of GameSpy matchmaking system, simply because I cannot rely on them to continue to be there for any length of time. Not to mention the fact that I feel that Glue charging so much for a service that has been provided for the last 7 years, a hell of a lot cheaper than that, is questionable to say the least. PC Gamer have been able to get their hands on the PC version of BioShock Infinite and have been able to reveal some of the graphics options available in the game. Included in the options menu are settings like anti-aliasing, texture detail, dynamic shadows, post-processing quality, light shafts, ambient occlusion, object detail, VSync, and perhaps most importantly, FOV slider and UI margins. Now, this is kind of a big deal. Any of you that purchased BioShock initially on PC probably ran into a hell of a lot of problems, including the fact that the game really wasn't properly designed for widescreen monitors. It had all sorts of problems with the horizontal FOV. Now, it was eventually patched with 1.1 to deal with this, but changing the FOV was still not really an option within the graphics menu. You could essentially just click the horizontal FOV lock, and that was it. You could either turn it off or on. Wasn't necessarily good enough for some people, although it was significantly better. There was some nasty stretching in the original version that was not so pleasant to see at all. Of course, the game also suffered from a wide variety of other issues, including Games for Windows Live and the fact that the actual system itself was a particularly nasty version of the Secure-ROM DRM, which caused a number of problems for people. It had a 3 activation limit that would accidentally activate and stuff like hardware changes and all sorts of things like that. Not so good. Thankfully, that was removed in mid-2008. It was really nasty for PC users on launch, actually. And indeed, just the version in general wasn't that great. We had mouse acceleration problems, things like that. The second game was certainly better in that regard, but the multiplayer was, of course, garbage, and I'm thankful that they will not be including that in BioShock Infinite. So it's good news, certainly, that we're seeing the ability to scale our UI as well as muck around with the FOV. Console UI has a tendency of being a little bit too big, mostly because you're playing on a television that is quite a far way away, so you have to think about larger text and larger menus and things like that. So I'm hoping that this stuff will actually work out pretty well on PC. No news as of yet of a proper inventory system or anything like that, as far as I know. but the game is certainly looking a lot better on PC than the previous versions. Now, the follow-up story is on the subject of the box art. Now, the box art was recently changed to be one of these fairly ridiculous man with gun and debris in the background. You've probably seen a lot of those over the past couple of years. That seems to be the in thing for whatever reason. Also, remember to put a lot of orange in there. Fire and orange is always good. These random orange sparks. I mean, if you look at the box art for this thing, then it really, really does look like it could be Battlefield 3. They just need this shadow cast on the main character, and it's essentially Battlefield 3. There are so many games that look like this right now. Now, in an interview with Wired.com, Ken Levine, the creative director for BioShock Infinite, explained why they changed the box art. And essentially, it comes down to the idea that they want to sell this game to people that aren't already into BioShock. And the way they're going to do that is via the use of this generic box art, which is supposedly pretty appealing to these kind of people. He actually went as far as to say that they went and did a tour around a bunch of, like, frat houses. This is a direct quote, and places like that. People who are not gamers, not people who read IGN. Gamers read IGN, that's a joke. And we said, so, have you guys heard about BioShock? And not a single one of them had actually heard of it. And as a direct result, they decided, you know what, we need to make the cover art more appealing for people like that. And apparently that's the way to do it. A burning American flag in the background, a badass-looking guy with a big shotgun, sparks, and things like that. Apparently that's what appeals to frat boys. Who knew? Weird thing being that frat guys do actually play a lot of video games. Stuff like Call of Duty and Halo is extremely popular with them. And I have to wonder just how many of them wouldn't have known about BioShock. BioShock sold a great deal of copies and was pretty popular amongst that kind of demographic, although perhaps not as much as Mass Effect, Halo, and of course, the one and only Call of Duty. Now, when it comes down to my opinion over this, I actually couldn't give a damn because I buy all my games digitally, either over Steam, Gamersgate, Origin, and all those other wonderful places. That is what I do, and you know what? Doesn't matter to me. Box art. You want to know why that doesn't matter to me? Because my games are in a text list. I click the name of the game, and then that's it. I am on with the game. Or I click a small icon on my desktop. I don't have boxes anymore. PC users really shouldn't care about this. I can certainly understand why console users might be, because it's like, oh, I was looking forward to some really cool box art. And as it turns out, I get Mr. Mano Generic over here, and that's got to be part of my game collection. Admittedly, considering that you tend to file games sideways rather than front-facing, I guess it's really not all that important. Ken has promised that there will be alternate box art available for printout and download, but he's pretty adamant about how important the box art actually is in order to sell it to so-called non-gamers, which I think is, again, a bit of a misnomer, because the people you're actually trying to sell it to are guys that play certain kinds of FPS. Yeah, they are gamers, they just only play certain kinds of games. They do play legitimate core games, but again, they're perhaps not so interested in a title like BioShock. He goes on to say, there are plenty of products that I buy that I don't spend a lot of time thinking about. My salad dressing. If there's a new salad dressing coming out, I would not have any idea. I use salad dressing. I don't read salad dressing weekly. I don't care who makes it. I don't know any of the personalities in the salad dressing business. So, yeah, it's a reasonable argument, honestly, I've got to say. I don't really have too much of a problem with it, and if that's the kind of compromise you need to make in order to make sure that games like BioShock are actually successful and that we see more interesting settings in video games rather than generic multi-million-dollar modern military shooters, just because I want to add more M's to the acronym, then okay. If that's the compromise that needs to be made, fine. If you need to advertise it on television in a certain way that maybe even doesn't really do the game justice, as it were, as long as it actually sells to people that wouldn't have otherwise picked it up, fine. I will leave the marketing to you. That is not something that I'm particularly interested in as a gamer. There's a flip side to that interview when you talk about salad dressing. As a salad dressing connoisseur, I'm not all that concerned about how salad dressing is marketed because it's not being marketed to me. I already know all I need to know about salad dressing. So if you are going to sell salad dressing to the salad dressing muggles, then you can do that as you wish. That's not really a problem for me, as long as the game doesn't suck. And so far it's looking pretty good. They've pushed the game back to March next year because they want to continue to polish it. Yes, that's exactly what I want from you. Infinite looks pretty promising. It looks like they're going to tighten up what's been happening with BioShock over the past couple of games. But let's be honest, great setting, lousy FPS, right? That's pretty much what BioShock was. Its gunplay wasn't particularly interesting. Overall, the mechanics were pretty weak. And it was great, but it was carried by the atmosphere. I want Infinite to be able to do the same thing and also provide me with a really cool FPS experience, and I'm hoping with the inbuilt 1999 mode that it will also be genuinely challenging, which is something that I cannot say BioShock really was. Alright folks, that is me done for the day. Thank you very much for watching this content patch, and I will see you next time.